Thanks for joining Multifamily Talks, a RealPage podcast. On this episode of the show, I'm joined by fellow RealPager and more importantly, published author, Jason Kay. We took the time to discuss his new book, Journey to a Rainforest Team Culture, in which he leverages the concept of a business fable to teach his framework of building a vibrant team culture. What got me to take notice was the fable is actually set in the world of multifamily operations, something our listeners are certainly aware of, but the lessons in the framework are truly applicable to anyone who is either leading or a part of a team. Jason was kind enough to really dig through the framework presented in the book, even indulging in a sidebar on whether motivation is just a myth or not, a phrase I am particularly fond of. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and with that, let's get to the show. Jason, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm excited to be here.
I'm super excited to have you here for a couple different reasons. This is the first podcast I've done with another RealPager, so we'll just disclose that right away.
Yep.
You're part of RealPage, but that is not why we have you on. When I was thinking about inviting you on this one and did that, I invited you for some very, very different reason. You're also a published author, no?
Yes, I am. I published a book called Journey to a Rainforest Team Culture in June. So I've been kind of making the rounds and doing a lot of social media posts, trying to get the word out there about the book. So I'm happy to be here to talk about it today.
Well, it was effective because I wouldn't have known that you did the book if I hadn't seen something on LinkedIn that you'd posted and shared. So I was excited to come in and bring you in, but I was also, I'm going to be really honest, I was really angry at you when I first heard that you wrote a book. Because the way it was framed for me was it was a book about multifamily.
Yeah.
Which isn't really true, though, is it?
No, it's not true. So it's a leadership book about a leadership framework that I've developed and that I've utilized throughout my career. But the way it's written is told from the perspective of a multifamily property manager. And so it's very rich with the world, but not specifically about multifamily.
Right. And full disclosure, because I'm never going to write this book. I'm just going to own that. The book was going to be all about the experience of student housing and multifamily managers and the insane stories that we can all tell and usually do at happy hours at different conferences. So I was happy to hear that it wasn't that because there's still that opportunity.
Okay, I had a similar idea, so maybe we need to talk offline about how we can make that happen.
I think the world needs to hear it, and I think it might actually need to be like a Netflix series, and we can really bring it out.
Yes.
But what made you decide to write the book? Like, we all have kind of ideas. What made you finally go, hey, I need to do this?
So my career kind of evolved from working on property to working as a director of learning and development. Now I currently am the director of onboarding and enablement for RealPage within the delivery organization. And that helps onboard new hires as well as do ongoing training. And so years ago, as I was teaching leadership to property managers, I had a realization that there's a huge need for something that allows property managers and just managers in general to have a toolbox to put all of these miscellaneous trainings that they get into some sort of framework. Because property managers in general, they don't have the time to connect those dots on their own. And so I saw a need to provide a framework where they can just have those dots connected. And that's the really cool thing about this leadership framework is it's not in opposition of trainings that you've already had. Actually, the trainings you've had slot into this at various points really nicely. So there was a need, and I tried to fill that need.
Okay, and was it your own experience in multifamily that kind of inspired that need to fill that need, or what was the really kind of
in general? So and I know you are a self-proclaimed leadership junkie, and
yeah.
I'm the same way, right? I've read all the books, I've listened to the podcasts, etc. And there was this vacant space, and so it wasn't necessarily multifamily that inspired me, but this idea of, as I read things, and I've always been on the front lines of businesses. I've always been the person who manages that customer-facing team. And there's a lot of times where at that level in any organization, the content that I was digesting didn't feel like it was for me or that I was able to relate to it, because there's stories about CEOs and Martin Luther King Jr. and all of these, like, from where I'm sitting on the bus, these grand figures. And I'm like, I just need something to help me manage these people day to day. And that didn't exist for me. So I tried to provide that.
So you brought up an interesting thing that I was going to get to later, but I'll bring it up earlier. You know, You're right. Some of my favorite books that are out there do have either CEO or COO in the title of them.
Right.
And you're right. It's hard for me sometimes to go, okay, great. I am an individual contributor of a relatively large organization. I'm not leading teams anymore. How does this fit within my day to day? Who is this book for? So is it for a particular layer of management or aspiring leaders, or who is the intention, and who do you think it could actually benefit?
So the book can benefit any leader. And actually, it's funny, this week I had a former associate of mine who has moved into homeschooling her kids, and she read the book.
Okay. God bless her.
Yeah, it's a tough job. But she read the book and she texted me and she said, first of all, I want to tell you congratulations. I really enjoyed the book. But second of all, I find what you did actionable for raising my kids and doing the schooling that I'm doing with them. I was like, okay, so the book transcends just management and leadership. It can be some life lessons. I wrote the book specifically for frontline leaders. That's really my target audience. Okay. Because again, and Andrew, all levels of a company will tell you that the frontline people are the most important. Right? They have the biggest impact on your bottom line, on your company's reputation. But oftentimes, the amount of resources and time that's put towards the managers who lead the teams who have the biggest impact isn't significant. And so I found myself, when I first became a manager, having to learn a lot of things on my own.
Right.
I had to make a lot of mistakes. I had to try to find friends and mentors to help me. I had to cobble things together. And so this is the book that I wish I had when I first became a manager. It's going to give you a foundation for building teams and having longevity as a manager. And that's why I wrote it. I wrote it for those folks who are like, I used to be the roles that I'm now managing, and I don't know what to do, and no one's helping me. So this book is that answer.
Well, and this is why I didn't want to pigeonhole it into, hey, we wrote it for community managers, or we did that.
Right.
Because it's obviously it's much bigger than that. But with that said, since we are talking to primarily multifamily housing at this point, it was the thing that struck me the most was, if anyone's taking a really honest look, we have at best, broken leadership development system in multifamily in general. You and I were talking about this, when we were prepping for this, is like, the common pathway is you start off as a leasing professional, which you get really good at sales and people interactions, those kind of things. Yep. And we reward you for that by locking you in a back office and calling you an assistant community manager.
Yep.
And when you survive that path, we reward you again by making you a community manager. But so often, as you addressed, we're not giving you the leadership skills
Correct.
To truly lead a team. And that was one of the things I did really appreciate about the book. I've read it. I tore it up. I've got my little dog ears we're going to get to in this. Okay. And I should say congratulations, because it really is a good read. And I think you nailed what you tried to write it for.
Thank you.
So let's go this way. So there's obviously a framework to, like, you're calling it a framework to actually deal with this.
Yeah.
And the other thing that candidly, when I first started being promoted, I'm like, okay, journey to a Rainforest Team Culture. Mm-hmm. What the heck does that mean? When I was first thinking about it.
Yeah.
So describe how you came up with a Rainforest Team Culture. Like what does that mean?
Okay, so a little backstory to help you understand how I got to the point of the model.
Sure.
I was working on a team where I had a leader who pretty much checked all of the good leader boxes, right? They had one-on-ones, goal settings, team meetings, et cetera, et cetera.
So they did all the things.
They did all the things that you're supposed to do, all the trainings that you get. But there was something that was kind of ringing hollow about the team culture and the leadership. And it really came into focus for me when there was a person on the team who lacked emotional control and was a bit toxic to not only the people we were working with, our internal customers, but also the team members. And when we went to the leader and we said, hey, this is a problem and we need you to address it, we were told that, well, this person produces high quality work quickly and it would be extremely hard to replace. And we have a lot on our plate that we have to get done. basically telling us that we're going to have to deal with a certain level of uncomfortability.
Right.
And so I realized that even if you check all the leadership boxes, if you're not providing this foundation of like psychological safety, it's not going to take root. And so then I started to explore the differences between employee satisfaction and employee engagement. And I realized they're two very different things. And you can't have engagement without having satisfaction. So then I started to look into, well, what goes into being happy at work versus engaged at work? And then I was just doing some reading off topic, and I came across this graph of our ecosystems.
Yep.
And if you look at the graph, on the vertical axis, you have annual rainfall, and on the horizontal axis, you have annual temperature. And what struck me was, if you drew a 45-degree line from the 0 point up, every ecosystem exists under that line, which told me that there were no ecosystems that had high levels of rainfall and low temperatures. They didn't exist.
Right.
In order to get rainfall to happen, you need to start to incrementally increase the temperature of the ecosystem. And that's when I had an aha moment. I was like, this is an exact correlation to employee satisfaction and employee engagement. You can't have engagement if you don't have satisfaction. So rainfall is engagement, satisfaction is temperature. And as you start to increase satisfaction, you open up the potential for engagement. And I say potential because you've got a bit of history with ecosystems.
We'll get to that.
you've got the desert. Yeah. And the desert is a great example of something that is really high temperatures, really low rainfall. And we've all worked in those offices where people are happy to show up, they like the people they work with, they have resources, they feel like they're being paid okay, but they are not going above and beyond. Yeah. They're not being innovative, they're not developing themselves. Those are those desert ecosystems. And those are kind of some of the most tricky ones, right? Everything seems great, everyone's happy, but they're not producing work that's helping the company grow and evolve. So that's kind of where that led to.
So I'm going to put the tech team on the spot because I'm going to say that we're going to include that graph in the show notes. Cool. I have no idea if we can do that or not.
That's fine. I included it in the book.
Exactly.
So, if you really want a copy of that, you should go
and
check
we
out
will
the book.
definitely talk about how to get the book and everything. And yeah, I mean, so when I understood what you were doing and that we were really talking about, okay, how do we get an environment that was both high in precipitation or rain, and relatively high in temperature at that point. Yep. That is a rainforest. Again, you alluded to it. I've said this before on the podcast, my degree is aquatic biology with an emphasis in ecology and evolution. So when I realized this was an ecology example, I'm like, oh, I'm in. Like, let's go. I get to use some of this education again. But rain and temp are actually acronyms, right?
Yes.
So if you don't mind, can we walk through what the acronyms are? Yep. Not every point in detail. We'll get through some of those because obviously, guys, go read the book. Like, go grab the book and read it. But let's walk through what's rain, what's temp, and then we'll talk about what to attack first, maybe.
Absolutely. So TEMP, T-E-M-P, is an acronym for tone, which is around how positive, supportive, and safe your culture is. E is for enthusiasm, how excited and jazzed are people to show up and who they work with, their leader, et cetera. And there's some other things like events and award ceremonies and things like that fit into enthusiasm. Then there's motivation, that's broken down into a couple of pillars. Basically, praise falls under motivation, having the right mindset, like what motivates your people to do their job. And then resources is a huge thing that helps with motivation. And then the P is pay. Right. And for me, pay is a huge part of satisfaction, and not just your salary, but also things like, are your benefits good, your PTO policies, your flexible work arrangements, whatever that goes. That's how you pay your employee.
Yeah.
Rain, the R in rain is for reason. Other people call it higher purpose or a why, some sort of purpose beyond making money or growing your company, gathering customers, things like that. A is for autonomy. The ability, the freedom within the job that the people have. I is for innovation. And then N is for nurture. And the nurture portion is what most leaders will recognize as the trainings that they have. Those are the goal-setting meetings, how you grow. Even critical feedback can fit into that. How are you correcting behaviors and helping people get better at what they do?
So definitely, there's a couple things in there I definitely want to hit on as we go through. But where I'd like to start with this is the one you actually started with, tone. So one of the things that I was actually surprised as I was reading the book that it took me to get to, M in temperature before we started talking about motivation or kind of why, or reason R for why. And you even quote him in the book and recommend the book in there. As Simon Sinek says, start with why. And I'm notorious for telling our sales teams all the time, it's why before how. No one cares how something works until they know why they need it.
Correct.
After reading the story, I understand. That's the other thing we should talk about, that this is kind of positioned as a fable.
Yeah.
With learnings after every
That's a
chapter.
good point. We didn't share that, did we?
Yeah, no, we didn't. We kind of jumped in.
Yeah, so it's a fable around, you follow this property manager named Eliza. She gets a new job at a new company managing the biggest asset she'd ever managed. It's like 800 units. And she's really excited to start. She gets in the mix and she realizes that the team she inherited, which oftentimes as a leader we do, right? We don't get to pick our team, we inherit a team. The team that she inherited is extraordinarily toxic, beyond anything that she's ever dealt with before. And so she turns to her former regional and her mentor and says, hey, I need some help with this. And so that's when her mentor teaches her this ecosystem framework to try to intentionally move from that frozen tundra all the way up to the rainforest.
So before I get into the temp and all those other things, actually, I want to dive into something you just said there. She turned to her former regional, which is her mentor.
Yeah.
And I found that choice really interesting from an authorship perspective because she didn't turn to Bonnie, who Bonnie is her regional,
her current regional.
Yes. It was, hey, I need advice on how to do this.
Yes.
Let me go to my former regional. Why did you choose to make that the pathway that she goes to get the direction? So
this is really interesting conversation to have because the book is published by Conscious Capitalism Press. And I don't know if you know anything about Conscious Capitalism, but they're a not-for-profit organization that believes capitalism can be done in a more conscious way.
Sure.
And there's a part of that talks about keeping your stakeholders in balance. And you have your employees, you have the environment, you have your shareholders, you have your vendors. And when you keep all of those in balance, you're a little more of a conscious leader. But to answer your question around why she turned there, I've found in my career that as a leader, there are times where you're working with an organization that you don't have the top-down conscious leadership or positive leadership. And so more often than not, you have to develop your own pocket of consciousness, your own pocket of excellent culture, because your responsibility at the end of the day is to your team. And so the norm, in my experience, and I'll speak for myself, the norm is not to have these amazing, leaders who can provide you what you need. Oftentimes, you're finding this on your own.
Right.
And so I wanted to set up that dynamic to say, look, if you're in a situation like this, you can still find someone who can help you. You can utilize the book and you can create your own pocket within your organization, even if you don't feel like you're being supported from the top down.
Yeah, it's a great example because I think we've all been in situations like that where, I don't remember the stat, you probably know it better than I do. It's like, what kind of percentage of people who leave an organization are leaving because of the relationship with their manager? It's like the number one reason.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to me, it was really interesting that you did that because I've still got former bosses that I worked for on the operations side that I ping all the time.
Sure, but you also have former managers that you don't ping and you probably don't want to ever talk to again.
Correct.
Right? So
it's actually one of my favorite interview questions when I am hiring folks is like, who's the best boss you ever had and why? And who's the worst boss you ever had and why? And I tell them I don't need names, but I want you to think that through.
Yeah.
But it was I really enjoyed seeing that relationship because I see it so much. Again, I'm talking multifamily. I see it so much in multifamily.
Yeah.
But
no. With how being a property manager is kind of an ideal example of being able to create a pocket because you can have, I tell you what, being a multifamily manager for me was one of the most rewarding jobs because I felt like a carefree entrepreneur in a way.
Yep.
I had a clear budget, I had a team, I had a product, and I could work it, and I could motivate my team, and I could get them to do, great jobs with sales and customer service, regardless of whatever else was happening within the company. The whole company could be falling down, but I controlled the performance of my team and the results that we were getting. So for me, it was kind of a natural, let's put her isolated and give her a mentor and see how she can turn this around.
Okay, so the mentor gives her the framework of the Rainforest culture. Again, I immediately thought, okay, we're going to go to why are we here? What are we doing? That why. That's not where you had her start. That's not where you had Eliza focus first. You had her focus on tone first. And I've got a double-edged sword question for you. Okay. Number one, why tone before kind of the broader purpose, et cetera? And then the other portion of it at the end, if you don't mind explaining this, is that the way you would always do it? Or is it, hey, you look at the situation that you're in and potentially maybe you're not starting on T. You might be starting on I or whatnot.
Good question. I started with tone because in my experience, and according to the research, if you don't have a foundation of psychological safety, all of the rest of your efforts are going to fall short eventually. There may be an immediate buy-in, but then they will fall off because, again, like in the example I gave you, we were trying these other things that were further down, the path, and they just weren't sticking. We weren't able to get invested in them because we weren't able to be vulnerable. And when you are in a psychologically safe environment where you feel free to speak up and ask questions and ask for help, you are more likely then to invest in the other pillars when they're introduced. And so if you were to come into a team, so I took over a team about a year and a half ago. Okay. I didn't know anybody on the team. And they were all kind of looking at me like, who are you? Why did you get the job? And I was looking at them like, I don't know any of you. Okay. So you have to start from that place of, hey, change is scary. I get it. I'm scared. You're scared. We don't know what's next. Let's just get to know each other. If I had walked in and I was like, our grander purpose is X, they'd have been like, okay, who are you?
Yeah.
How are we going to get invested with that? Right. So you have to lay that foundation first before you get to those. First, you can't enjoy the opera if you don't have food, water, and shelter. And that's really why can be to frontline managers. They're like, Guy, what are you talking about? We don't have resources. We're overwhelmed. You're over here, wanting us to analyze the Mona Lisa. And we're like, where are we getting our next meal?
By the way, if you have been to the Louvre and seen the Mona Lisa, there is a much better Da Vinci right outside the door without the crowds because I was there this past summer. But essentially, as you're saying that, you mentioned that you built this framework to process, everything, and you can have other learnings and fit them in.
Yeah.
As you were speaking, I actually had a moment where you did that, and you were talking about, okay, the tone has to be right, and you specifically mentioned someone has to have the freedom and the safety to be able to speak up.
Yeah.
I immediately thought of 5 dysfunctions of a team.
Yeah.
Like that's the bottom framework of 5 dysfunctions of a team is that being able to communicate openly on that. So again, just an example of how you can be reading something else and it fits within this framework pretty darn nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is really that roadmap, that framework to use those other things to intentionally drive your culture.
Okay. So, we've talked about, why that tone is so important. And again, figure out in a little different way. I'd like to go to motivation for a little bit.
Okay.
I've been out there before. I've said it. I still have a hard line belief in this, in that, motivation is a myth. Like an extended, everyone walking up motivated every day, is, you need discipline to do that. So do me a favor, frame the way that, in fact, let's read it from the book, because I actually highlighted it, because I want to make sure people understand that it's not necessarily you wake up and you're ready to go to work every day because you've got this motivation. It's a little different. You said, there are 3 pillars of motivation that I found to be most impactful. Find the best mindset for the task, provide resources, and give positive feedback. I'm not sure where I want you to go with this other than describing how you got to there, but when you think about that motivation, how did you come to the 3 pillars and how does that set everything up?
Sure. When I think about employees having to do their job day in and day out, so motivation for me is, how am I moved forward to be able to perform the tasks I need to perform?
Okay.
One of the things is alignment with what my reward system is. where my mindset is.
Right.
If I am someone who likes order, and this task doesn't give me the ability to show how order can be put in, I'm less motivated to do it. It doesn't align with how I think or how I get rewarded intrinsically, right? So if you can understand that about your employees and help them connect the dots to what already motivates them, what already rewards them internally, that removes a barrier for them to actually performing some of the tasks that they maybe view as mundane or things that they don't want to do, et cetera. So that's the mindset. It's kind of akin to their own personal why in a way, but it's also about a reward system, which isn't necessarily tied to a why, but that's another conversation. The next one is resources. There's so many tasks that we do that might not be muscle memory. And so if you don't have either training to learn how to do them, job aids to understand how to execute them, you might put them to the side. You might not engage in them. And so again, you're not motivated to do these things because you don't have the resources necessary to perform the task in a way that helps you reach mastery, right? You want to be good at your job. And if you look at something, right, have you ever avoided something? You're like, I'm not really good at that, so I don't want to try it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so same thing with your job. You're looking at a task going, I'm not really good at that, and I don't have any help to do it, so I'm not going to engage in it. So resources. That can be a mentor, that can be someone else, a trainer, document, et cetera. And then the last one is, what was the last one? Sorry, blanked out for a second.
I got to open it up again.
You'd think I wrote a book or something.
Get positive feedback.
Positive feedback. Okay, yeah. So positive feedback, for me, isn't seen as a developmental thing as much. Like it's not in nurture as much as it's in motivation. Because you want people to feel good and continue the behaviors that are working. And so when you focus on those behaviors around positive feedback, you're instilling them with confidence, and that gives them the ability to continue whatever task it is. So again, motivating them, which is different than inspiring them.
Right.
Inspiring them lights the spark. Motivation is the gas in the tank that keeps the car going. And so that positive feedback can instill behaviors that are working and keep them performing them.
And I think that was what you did really well in the book, was being able to essentially change what I was thinking of in motivation was the inspiration. I think it's a better way to actually put that.
Okay.
But it's the way I hear motivation more than anything else. I need to be motivated to do this. No, that's not necessarily what you really need.
Those two words get interchanged in leadership, and so do satisfaction and engagement, and they get used interchangeably, and they're not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
So if you don't mind, I won't ask you to tell a whole bunch of stories from the book, but I think this one around motivation actually is a really good example of how you've used what I guarantee every property manager has dealt with at some point in their career on that. And it was a story of Eliza being able to turn Simon's view on an area of his job that he didn't actually enjoy. Yeah. To one where she reframed it to what actually drives and motivates him. Do you mind do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, totally. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a leasing agent which was having challenges around paperwork.
Right.
It's been this, tale as old as time.
True story. I hired an admin to take all the paperwork off of my best salesperson at one point. Just not the right answer, but
well, maybe not. But anyway, so Eliza takes the time to sit down with Simon, who's a leasing agent, who is that homage to Simon Sinek. So in the Reason chapter. Anyway, read the book. So sits down with him and takes the time to understand him, what he enjoys about his job. And it comes out that he really enjoys planning the resident events. That's part of his go-to. And if he could do that full time, he totally would. And she digs in a little further. What do you like about the resident events? And it kind of gets distilled down to the fact that it brings him a lot of fulfillment to inspire joy in others. He likes to see others happy and have a good time. So she's able to then take the paperwork and talk to him and almost coach him in a way and say, well, tell me about the paperwork. Tell me about your resident's experience or your prospect's experience when the paperwork isn't correct. And then he has to say, well, they get upset about it because they have to come back down to the office, or they have to sign something online, or if they have to pay more money, or et cetera, et cetera. How does that align with your reason around creating joy? It doesn't align. So how can we change our mindset to look at that as an extension of providing joy? And so once he's able to kind of make that connection, then the paperwork starts to happen, because now he's intrinsically motivated by sparking joy for others. If he doesn't do this correctly, he will definitely not spark joy in others. In fact, he'll go the opposite way. So he's now realigned his mindset to the task to understand how it aligns with how he's motivated internally.
I loved that approach, that because what I remember writing at the top of the page, and I don't remember which page it's on now at this point, but I wrote 4 words: a bespoke management approach, which was, when you ask who my best boss ever was, it was a regional manager. Or I would have answered at the time, it was a regional manager who held us all to the same standards, but in very different ways. He took the time to know us and understand what drives me versus what drives other folks that are in there. And mine was all about experience. I made all my managers read The Disney Way. I want Disneyland at my properties.
Oh my gosh. I got a chance to take a day-long version of the Disney course. Changed my life.
I'm so jealous right now. I could stop the podcast and go a completely different direction. So jealous. But yeah, he did. He took that time to do what Eliza did in the book. And that is understand what my motivations are, or what my reward system really is. What feeds me and what do I feel like success, and then reframe different tasks in that way. So it was, again, this isn't about, managing in property management, but it was a really good example of something that somebody can apply to any field.
Absolutely. I was taking the time to get to know an employee and what makes them tick will help you exponentially as you lead them through different phases of their career and different phases of a company. Sometimes things are awesome, sometimes they're not. But if you know deep down what drives them internally, you're able to help them better.
Well, and then the third part that you couldn't remember on what are the 3 pillars that I kind of want to dive into, because you've got some really interesting about that.
Okay.
That's providing feedback.
Yeah.
And one of the things you brought up I think it might have been in the workbook section of this chapter, because that's another thing about the book. There's, yes, it's written as a fable, and every chapter is kind of dealing into one of these different letters of the acronym. But at the end of every chapter, there's also practical applications and questions that every leader can ask themselves and really kind of essentially do a self-assessment on.
Yeah, that was super important to me, because I wanted to have, I wrote it in a story format because I think stories are more engaging. You have the opportunity to get sucked in and, put on the shoes of the character that you're following. It also allowed me to show the internal, what was she thinking versus what was she saying? How did she process? How did she work through these things? Which provided some great examples for leaders on when they face similar situations. But at the end, I needed this, again, with frontline managers being the target audience, I need them to apply this now. They can't read this 4-hour book and then go, well, that was nice, and put it down. How can you put this into practice immediately? And so those call to action sections at the end of each chapter are critical if you're really serious about using this framework to take your team to the next level.
Well, and I thought that was a great way to actually consume the book too, because it was, for me anyways, it was read a chapter every morning. Read a chapter every morning, you're done in less than 2 weeks on that one. Sure, you could sit down and read the whole thing in 4 hours probably, but it broke it up so that, again, you can contemplate, you can do those types of things. And one of the things that, again, got me contemplating around was, giving feedback. But you laid out a little bit of a framework of what's the difference between average feedback and great feedback. Can you share with the audience kind of how you think about the difference between those two?
Yeah, how I think about average feedback is when you praise the result that's actualized.
Yeah.
So if I'm using a leasing agent, for example, I can say, hey, you closed 5 leases last week. You really crushed it. That's amazing. Great job. Okay. You have a little burst of, enthusiasm, and you're like, great, I feel motivated now. But what you didn't tell them is what behaviors you believe led to that successful result. Right. So a better way to praise is to say, hey, I saw you close 5 leases last week. That's great. But I really like how you're making true and genuine connections with the people that you tour. It seems like you really want to find them the right place for them and not just close them. And I think that goes a long way in the success that you had last week. Keep it up. So now as a leasing agent, I go, okay, my manager likes it when I make genuine connections. So I'm going to continue to do that because that's what we believe equals these good results. And so you're you're solidifying this behavior that leads to positive results.
So let's bring the protagonist of the story in. I think I'm using that word right. Rachel.
Yes.
It is protagonist, right?
Yes.
Okay. Science major, sorry. So
Theater major, you're fine.
So Rachel kind of describes the exact opposite of what you just described from a great feedback perspective.
Yeah.
You know, she was the leasing agent who could sell snow to an Eskimo.
Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about how you decided to kind of put that. I think I already know. I think I already addressed it, but how you tried to put a character like that in the book and why? Because it kind of created that toxic team culture.
Yeah.
But talk to me a little about her journey and Eliza's journey on having to deal with that, and how do you take somebody gets this happens in sales a lot.
Yeah.
We could walk 2 floors down in this building. There's a lot of people that get praised for.
I'm sure there are no toxic people in our sales.
Yeah, no, not at all. I've never worked with any of them.
The thoughts of Andrew Bowen do not represent those of Jason K.
Thoughts of Andrew Bowen do not represent everything for RealPage either.
Okay, fair enough.
But think about it. I mean, talk to me about how you built that into the story, because I thought it was a really important piece, because that whether it's actually toxic or not, I'm not going to say it's toxic. Sometimes the perception of that praise by others in an organization can feel that way.
Yeah. So Rachel is a well-decorated leasing consultant.
Right.
Has been with the company for a long time. You know, it receives all of the awards for highest leases, et cetera. When you're in an environment where you're praised for your outcome and there's no praise or recognition for effort or culture, which is one thing I do think is awesome about our sales organization. There's a cultural award that has nothing to do with numbers.
Yes.
And so if it's only about the results, you create an environment where people are only focused on the results. There's no teamwork, there's no sharing, there's none of that. And so I felt like, one, if I was going to write a story, I wanted it to be as close to reality as possible, because I needed people to read it and go, yep, I've been there. Mm-hmm. I know that person. I've worked with that person. Maybe I was that person at some point in my career. And we needed something to push against Eliza, because if this book was, easy skating the whole way, you'd get in a couple chapters in and be like, what? But now you're in there and going, oh, this isn't working. How is she going to navigate this? And Andrew, I used to do those master classes online.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen? Yeah. So there's one with, the guy who wrote West Wing. I forget his name off the top of my head.
I do too.
Yeah, him. But he's also a playwright. And he said, I like to write scenes and situations that I, as the author, don't know how to get out of. And if I do that, my reader can't get ahead of me. But if I've already got a solution figured out before I've even written the problem, the audience is going to get ahead of me. They're going to dismiss the piece, whatever it is, the show, the scene, the movie. And so there were a couple of times that I wrote stuff and I was like, if I change this, I can make it easier for myself, but I can't, because these are things that happen. And so I had to walk away, take time and go, how would I figure it out? And then write that solution, which I thought would then be an example of, when you face this situation, here's an idea of how you can approach it, right? It's not a one size fits all. You're going to get in situations that that solution isn't going to work for you, but at least there's, I tried to write complicated situations. And
you did a good job of it. And again,
thank you.
Not picking on sales downstairs, other than I just like to pick on sales downstairs.
Who hurt you, bro?
Been here a long time, brother. Let's kind of take this to more of a future-looking statement, or future look. And you and I talked about this in kind of the prep station. The multifamily industry is at a really interesting place right now.
Yeah.
Meaning that the operational model on site, the one that you wrote on the book, is being really scrutinized. And there's a real, I don't want to say intense, but there's a real movement towards, some people call it centralization, some people call it specialization, some people call it, regionalization, just whatever. The operational model of on-site is becoming more and more decentralized.
Yeah.
more and more things that used to happen on site are not anymore, which actually I think is very healthy for the industry, and I think is something that does need to happen.
Evolution is necessary.
Yes. Those back to my degree, those that don't evolve don't have a good outcome.
No.
Like, it doesn't end well for them. But what I do see, where I see people looking at technology, and as RealPage, we thank them for that, and structure, I don't see them looking towards the leadership side of it and the leadership development. One of the things I asked you to think about before coming on here was, knowing that that's what we're facing, or at least what our partners are facing. What are some of the ways that you would direct people to kind of think through, how do we develop leaders? If we're going to have a regional manager who their entire time as a community manager never managed a collections team, or essentially all the duties of what an assistant community manager traditionally did.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
This is a tough one, and I've noodled on it since we talked. I don't know that there's a one-size-fits-all answer, because the industry itself is moving in this direction in fits and spurts in different ways.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is that if you are going to move, if you're going to change the traditional model and move to something that's more centralized or standardized, your onboarding, your training department needs to become more robust, because the things that were kind of learned through osmosis as you experience that traditional on-property team
Good way of putting it.
are not going to be learned. And so for me, when I moved into a manager role, I was lucky enough to have a mentor on property who helped show me the reporting and navigation of all the software, et cetera, et cetera. Didn't get any people leadership.
Right.
So that's where I had to really make up the difference. Now you're asking people to potentially not know all the parts of the business that they used to know and lead the people. So now you're not giving them any training on the ins and outs of all the positions they're leading, the technical aspects of it, nor you're giving them people leadership. So now you're actually making it worse for those leaders to be successful at their job. So if you're moving in that direction, one, I would encourage you to really look at your training program and see what gaps have you developed in education for these people that you now need to fill, because if you don't, long-term, it will fail.
All right.
And two, I would ask you to look at, why are you making this move? And if the only reason is money, I ask you to then look at, how is this impacting my employees, who there will now be less of, and how is this impacting my customer experience? So as multifamily people, we like to say, we have a great job, we help people find homes.
Yep.
Great. If we turn this too much into a factory and we don't have the customer and the employee in mind as we do this, and we're just going to strictly increasing revenue, something is going to be lost eventually. And that's going to manifest in very different ways for different companies, depending on how they got there.
I absolutely concur with everything you just said. Like I said, it's been something that's been on top of mind for me anyways, is I want more organizations thinking past just, hey, we can go from 100 units to one employee to 125 units to one employer, whatever their ratio is.
Yeah.
There's downstream potential consequences, or maybe complications is a better way to put it.
Yeah.
There's things that we need to be thinking past just, can I take the activity we're doing on 4 properties and put it on one person in a different spot? But what is that downstream implication of that?
And so when we go back to the book and talk about tone, that level of psychological safety, if you're a company who's moving towards that model, your employees aren't blind. They see what's coming down the pipe.
Yep.
How are you making them not freak out at the fact that long-term you're looking to reduce staff? Because they're already looking into the future, and they're either going to leave to go somewhere that's more traditional, or they're going to invest if you're able to inspire them, motivate them, create that culture that you're like, hey, we're going to keep our top performers. We're going to find places for you. You're going to get training so that you can move into a more specialized role.
Well, and that brings us down to pay as well.
Yeah.
Because I was talking with a leader recently. Actually, I went on one of the podcasts where part of their entire goal of this is they want to be able to create a flexible work environment for their on-site teams.
Sure.
So maybe you are on site for 4 days a week and you're remote doing a specialized task for 1 day a week. So yeah, again, but I think the most important thing you said there for our partners to take away is communicate. Like just have that open dialogue of maybe not every detail of what you're going on, but you're right. People see it. Like people are not dumb.
Yeah.
Like, they see it. It goes from there.
Yeah.
So.
They watch the same podcasts. They, read the same articles. They're part of the same Facebook groups. Like they know.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So before we go to some kind of the feedback and how to get the book and all those types of things.
Okay.
Was there any elements of the book that we didn't cover today that you really want to make sure the audience gets a taste for?
Element of the book that we didn't cover. No, I think we covered a lot of the book in regards to its impact, how it can be utilized. I think what I'd like to say about the idea of the book is, I wrote this kind of as a passion project. I saw a need. I've been that leadership junkie for a long time. I want to you talk about personal reasons. I've done my own work, and my personal why is every day I get up to try to help other people do the best that they can do at whatever it is they're doing. It's the reason I used to direct plays. It's the reason I coached my kids' t-ball teams. It's the reason I'm a leader. It's the reason I wrote the book. And so I'm just a guy who manages a team at a big company. I'm not a CEO. I'm not a former sports star. Read this book, and if you like it, spread the word, because I honestly believe it can help a lot of people be better at their jobs, and that really aligns with me. So there's no marketing budget. It's just, if you like, you know what I mean? If you like it, please share it. Again, I think it's valuable. So where can what's the best way for them to get it? So if you want a paperback copy, you can go to my website, or if you need to get a hold of me, you can go to my website, www.jasonk.com. If you want to get a paperback version, a digital version, or an audiobook, go to Amazon. I was going to ask. It's the best place. Yeah. Did you record it yourself? I didn't, and here's why. Okay. I made a conscious choice not to. Because I did the foreword myself, because that's my own voice. I wrote the lead character as a woman. Oh, really good point. And it was important to me that the voice of this character was female. So I hired an actress, or an actor, actress is kind of an antiquated term, so an actor out of LA who does voiceover, and she did it. And she did a bang up job, because the feedback I've gotten from some of the audiobooks is, I forget that this is the same person reading some of these characters. Oh, wow. And so she's able to kind of make these subtle shifts in voice that really take you along for the ride. Very, very cool. And again, I'm going to put it on the tech team. I don't know if we're going to be able to do this or not, but we're going to put the links in the show notes. Cool. And for those who remember K is KAE. Yeah. So you'll be able to get that. So one last question. I asked this of all the guests, and I gave you the heads up. Normally, I let my guests pick whatever book they want. Yeah. I'm going to restrict you. Okay. If you could recommend one book on leadership, especially for multifamily leaders trying to grow up, and it's not yours. Okay. What's your recommendation and why? What do you think people get out of it? I'm going to say Drive by Daniel Pink. Mm-hmm. It is all about motivation. Yeah. Internal, extrinsic motivation. The real science behind what motivates people to do whatever it is they do. And when we had this talk, I started to re-listen to it, because when I thought about it, I was like, that's the one. That book, if you want to understand how to lead people, you need to understand what inspires and motivates people to do what it is they do. That book, even though it's older, I think it's like 2010. So some of the references are a little dated, but Dan Pink does a fantastic job of laying this book out. And he's a really great writer. So he kind of tells these stories that are engaging, and he's got a great radio voice. So if you like audiobooks, he's a fantastic voice to read his own work. Awesome. Well, Jason, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you coming in here and being willing to put kind of the RealPage side aside to talk about you and the book. Again, we'll put everything in the show notes, but really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, brother. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Multifamily Talks, a RealPage podcast. As always, the views expressed are those of the individuals participating and not those of RealPage.